Baseball, jazz, and short fiction are three uniquely American art forms born in the 19th century. By the early 20th century, all three were gaining in popularity along parallel lines. But they became more interconnected following the 1916 publication of the first literary baseball fiction, Ring Lardner's You Know Me, Al. Lardner's breakthrough novel actually first appeared as 6 separate short stories in the Saturday Evening Post that were ironically used as bait to lure the magazine's middle-class audience into its consumer-based advertisements. After that, other short fiction writers began addressing economic and social issues through stories about baseball and jazz that were often first published in magazines. Wright State University's Dr. Scott Peterson is an associate professor of communication, historian, and author specializing in sports writing and how baseball helped shape American society and culture from 1880 to 1940.
Baseball, jazz, and short fiction. Our goal is to look at them side by side as art forms and look for places where they cross together. For example, the men that owned the jazz clubs where the musicians would play also owned the Negro League baseball teams. Writers like Haywood Broun, who was a sports writer turned columnist, he wrote a series of short stories designed to portray baseball and jazz as cultural forces that were positive in response to the cultural gatekeepers who said, oh no, baseball's bad because there's gambling, jazz is bad because it encourages the children to dance wildly.
Wright State University's Dr. Lynette Jones is a professor of English and author specializing in short fiction writing from the Harlem Renaissance, a major early 20th century interdisciplinary movement in African American cultural expression.
One of the important things about the fact that baseball and jazz are represented in short fiction in magazines during the Harlem Renaissance period is it really helped promote the acceptance of baseball and jazz as forms of cultural expression. So you see short fiction by African American writers in magazines like Crisis and Opportunity that were being used to promote civil rights. A writer like Alice Dunbar Nelson, who published a story called Hope Deferred, there are some baseball references, and they really symbolize issues related to race and class. You know, Langston Hughes really was somebody who did a lot to promote African American literature, a writer who was nationally known.
Starting in the Big Red Machine era as a sports writer with the Dayton Daily News, where he worked for most of his career, Hal McCoy was inducted into the National Sportscasters and Sports Writers Hall of Fame in 2015.
I've seen old pictures of fans in the stands, and the men have coats and ties and hats on like they're going to church. When you had baseball writers like Ring Lardner and Grantland Rice who could command the English language, and it appealed to people of the upper and middle class and people who have college educations.
A prominent Dayton attorney and local legal historian, for most of his life, Dave Greer has worked as a professional jazz musician and still leads the classic jazz stompers band he founded 35 years ago.
Jazz was associated in the blue blood mind with gangsters because all the speakeasies where jazz was played in the 20s were owned by gangsters after all. There are the articles in the Saturday Evening Post and things like that. It's corrupting youth. But yeah, radio and records carried jazz back and forth to every element of society. It was a great homogenizing influence. And it infiltrated the upper strata of society because the popular entertainment was dancing. So the upper crust danced. They just danced in the ballroom instead of in some speakeasy somewhere. We had the Greystone Ballroom, ballroom at the Biltmore, ballroom at the Van Cleve. There were some great bands in Dayton, mostly dance bands. Michael Howard had a dance band in the hotels here in town for years and years. Dayton, it was full of music and full of musicians, and they're all influenced by jazz.
Join us October 29th for Wright State's Sultans of Swing Flapper Ball to celebrate 100 years of baseball, jazz, and short fiction. For more, visit us on the web.